live for this summer webinar series. Thank you for joining us today, wherever you are. This webinar is going to be focused on non-dilutive fundraising strategies for life science tools and medtech companies. And today with us, I'm really excited to have three people that have a wealth of knowledge and experience in that field, and that have agreed graciously to contribute some of this knowledge and share it with you. So today with me here are Eric Pistroff from NSF, Manbir Singh from BARDA Drive, and then Martis Kalas from Epicipher. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, each one of them, and then we can dive in. So how about we start with you, Eric? So Eric is a program director at NSF. Eric, if you could introduce yourself, your background, and your current position.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having me here today. So my name is Eric Piersdorf. I'm program director at NSF, primarily in the SBIR STTR program. So I manage the biological technologies and the pharmaceutical technologies portfolios. So biological technologies is probably where you'd see most of the the biotools, the lab tools kind of things in the space here. My background is in molecular cell biology. I have a PhD from Berkeley. Then I moved into things that are a little bit more applied, gene therapy vector design, and finally biomedical and mechanical engineering. Started a couple companies in the biomaterials space, mainly in drug delivery. And I worked at companies for about 15 years before joining NSF. So I have a history in small businesses. I'm actually lived in the LA area for many years and moved out to the DC area to join NSF about 5 years ago. And as I mentioned, most of the instrumentation, lab tools, that kind of thing that it fits into bio will probably be in my portfolios. But there also are a number of overlapping portfolios and other program directors who work in the space in instrumentation hardware. Also some biomedical, biomaterial, and medical device portfolios where my colleagues work as well. So I give one perspective from NSF, but there are others as well, and for some of those other topics. I'll hand it off to the next speaker.
Thank you, Eric. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the scope that you kind of touched on for NSF versus others later on in the webinar. How about we go to you now, Manbir? Go ahead.
Thanks, Alice. Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Great to see you all in the virtual meeting space. My name is Manbir Singh. I manage the BARDA Accelerator Network at BARDA, which is the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. I will happy to dive deeper into how BARDA works and everything and our funding opportunities later on. But for myself personally, I have a background in infectious disease research biotechnology. So started off in the lab at a CRO doing a lot of their outsourced microbiology needs. So probably have used a lot of tools that you all are developing and understand those pain points that are currently in the lab, but then transitioned over to business formation, entrepreneurship, and supported in previous roles a lot of federally funded spin-out technologies being developed into federal labs and helping commercialize those. So although I am biased to now my own funding authority organization, I do know a lot of the other ones as well. So if chances are, if I don't know the answer in BARDA, DoD, DHS, NASA, NIST, DOE may have. So happy to share all those resources.
Thank you, Manbir. And so switching a little bit from the funder side to the founder side. So we wanted to bring in a little bit of a different perspective from one of our portfolio companies, actually from our inaugural cohort. So Martis, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us. I'm Martis. I'm part of Epicipher. We're an epigenetics technology company founded about 11 years ago from academic science. I think we've, through the years, heavily leveraged SBIR, particularly through the NIH, to fund our R&D activities. And I think it's been really transformative the way SBIR has allowed us to take a lot of high risk, high reward projects on that I think have paid off really well. I think in biotools particularly, I just think that grants make a lot of sense because we have a shorter pathway from concept to MVP, and we've been really successful in launching not the big thing, the big idea, but these intermediate ideas, get them to market, get feedback. And like I said, we've been mostly with NIH, and NIH has been extremely supportive of us and helping us continue to advance our sciences. We've dabbled kind of in lots of different areas. We started as biochemistry group creating microarrays, and we were really focusing our epigenetic studies for inhibitor development. But using the grants, we've really pivoted in lots of ways, and now have moved into genomics platforms and actually are leveraging a lot of the technologies we built on the biochemistry side and integrating into the genomics. And I think that type of a product strategy that we've been able to build is really unique, and it's unique, and it's really, I think, enabled only in a world where grants exist. And so, yeah, I've been doing this for quite a while. I built the program, the SBIR program at Epicipher. And so I can help, kind of thinking through, if you get some questions on strategy, getting started, how to maintain it and not get distracted. Those are the types of things that I think a lot about, and I can hopefully give some insights on it. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Martis. And you touched a little bit on my kind of the next question, and I think it's an art and a science, right? And we've intentionally brought you here because you've really mastered that and know how to use non-dilutive funds like SBIR grants properly to advance your commercialization. And this is something that we'll touch on from different perspectives during the webinar. So I'd like to kind of bring it back to Eric and Manbir to ask you a little bit about how you fund companies. So what's kind of the mechanism? Some of our companies here are well familiar with it, maybe more with NSF, so that they more so than they are with BARDA, or vice versa sometimes. And so I'd like to hear a little bit more about the mechanism of funding that you use in your own role as funders. Manbir, let's start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I may throw a wrinkle in this because BARDA, unlike other federal agencies, does not do grants. We do contracts. So similar to using the DARPA model of contracts, milestone-based contracts with potential partners, we're able to have this, super easy, flexible mechanism to form partnerships with industry, both at the high level in terms of BARDA's mission, which really is to bring medical countermeasures to market across a whole host of health security threats, including chemical, burn, radiological, nuclear threats, anything pandemic, influenza, response, and emerging infectious diseases. So we have big funding opportunities called the Broad Agency announcement that help, take companies sometimes, through FDA clearance and into market or into the U.S. National Strategic Stockpile. But at the same time, we also do help a lot of early stage companies because, that's where, the future is and a lot of novel technologies being developed. So we have a mechanism called the Easy Broad Agency announcement, the Easy BA, where, what we look for from companies is to look at our funding opportunities that are always listed on our website and submit an abstract. And from there, you get a quick review. A market research call may happen. You get, if it looks like, oh yeah, this technology is in scope, you'll get invited for a full proposal submission. And from there, we'll do a full internal evaluation and then essentially go straight to negotiations and awarded. So with those funding opportunities, we generally aim to fund or work with our future partner company within 60 to 90 days on average to be able to fund them up to that $750,000 that is the Easy BA. So that's one mechanism of funding that we do with early stage companies. Another one is actually through my program, the BARDA Accelerator Network, which is currently being revamped and grown. So throughout this year, we'll actually have a lot of funding opportunities that we announce through the solicitations that we release through these hubs, which will both offer accelerator support. So, everything residence participation support that you all receive through programs such as this, as well as for non-dilutive funding solicitations in the even earlier stages for BARDA. So looking at funding for in the $50,000 to $200,000 range for a lot of companies. And with that, I will pass it over to Eric, and I'll actually drop a link in the chat for all the other partnership opportunities that BARDA has outside of those grant or contracts.
Thank you, Manbir. And Eric, maybe on to you to hear a little bit more about the way NSF funds companies. I know a lot of our companies here are, relying, I can say, on NSF and NIH and other SBIR grants, but I want to hear from your perspective a little bit.
Absolutely, and thanks for that introduction to the grant funding arena, Manbir. I appreciate that. So NSF does things a little bit differently. We do not use contracts. Phase 1 is a standard grant award. Phase 2 are what are called cooperative agreements. So it's similar to a traditional grant award, but it allows a little bit more flexibility, for the awardees at that point, for budget reallocations and having a little bit more direct control over what they're doing. NSF doesn't have an application-specific focus. It funds all areas of science, technology, and so I know a lot of times people write, is this an area that NSF is interested in? And it's like, well, if it's science and technology based, potentially, yeah. We evaluate the proposals using the standard NSF review criteria plus a solicitation-specific one. So that's looking at the intellectual merit. How interesting, how unique, how differentiating is this your approach from what's been done before? The broader impacts, if this is developed, how is it going to have a positive impact on society? And then there's the commercial potential. What is the market available for this? Who are the competitors? Are you going to be able to disrupt this, create a new market? So those are the 3 review criteria that are used to evaluate your proposals. NSF tries to be as synergistic with the other SBIR programs that exist. So it's one of 11, and since it doesn't have an application-specific focus, it really focuses on very early stage companies that we're often if not the first sources of funding that companies get in the door. Often riskier than a lot of other agencies are willing to fund, and we want to make our funding as impactful and catalytic as possible. So if you've gone out and you've raised $10-20 million, that's great. It might not be a great fit for phase 1 for NSF. You may be beyond that stage of company that we traditionally fund. We're really, it's now 300K, 305K, that's for phase 1. And we want that to be impactful for getting these companies off the ground and out the door. And I know some people are wondering, I saw a question, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. There's a question in the chat, and it's like, if you've had a phase 1 before, does that increase your likelihood of getting another one? For NSF, the answer is no. It doesn't necessarily decrease the likelihood that you get one in the future, but it doesn't help out or increase. We want each project that you have to be unique, and you want to have an interesting technology. You're de-risking in phase 1, move on to phase 2, and then graduate, get out the door to other sources of funding, whether it be additional non-dilutive or dilutive funding. If you have another new high-risk technology that you're developing, that might be a great fit to come in with a new phase 1. But if it's continued development of something you've already de-risked in phase 1 and brought on to phase 2, maybe it's tweaking it for a slightly different application or whatever, that would probably not be a good fit at all for the program. So just giving a little context as to where NSF fits in this kind of landscape of non-dilutive funding in the companies that we generally try to fund.
And just to give people an idea, kind of right off the bat, is there data that you can share on percentages of success and what applicants versus awardees?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the last full set of data we have is from a few years ago. The success rate for phase 1 is between 10 to 15%. So it is a very competitive process. For phase 2, not every phase 1 company applies for phase 2. When you're dealing with high risk technologies, some of them aren't going to work. You might need to go back to the drawing board, start over, take a different approach, whatever it may be. But for those who do apply, the success rate is between 40 and 50%. So it is much higher, but it still is a competitive process.
And Manbir, how about you and BARDA funding? Is there data that can be shared?
So I don't have any data off the top of my head, but similar to Eric's point, we are very competitive. I'll joke, but also I'm 100% serious. One of the A's in BARDA is advanced research. So generally, we are looking for a lot of, or at least enough preclinical validation for technologies before even at our earliest funding opportunities. And that's kind of where I'm re-envisioning that right now with the BARDA Accelerator Network to help get that right data for companies, because unfortunately, a lot of times we do have companies that receive other non-dilutive funding option, grants and other opportunities and such, and they have data, but it may not be the right data. So that's kind of one of my main passions, is helping companies make sure they're the right data, so that way when they're coming into our pipeline, do our various innovation programs, they're successful and can align better. So we're working on that, and also appreciate all of our other federal partners who fund them before us.
Thank you. Martis, I'm going to ask you, because you have a lot of experience with NIH grants. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the scope, opportunities that you found in NIH grant, and kind of the process of funding there?
Yeah. So warning, I don't work for the National Institute of Health.
You
And
do.
so take it for what it's worth, right? But yeah, I think we found that NIH is, I think to contrast it with NSF, right, is that NIH is, I think, kind of what Manbir was saying with like advanced, it's innovation, right? Like if you're innovating and bringing, new ideas to a space and the need is high, I think NIH is very receptive to that. And I could give maybe a couple examples of how maybe that wouldn't have worked at NSF, but it's worked successfully at NIH. And I think one would be, we developed a genomic platform to measure something, better than what could be done before. And then, so we had grant funding for that. And then we found another collaborator where we wanted to go into a specific disease and look for a specific biomarker that would help. And we were successful at getting that funded, right? And so it's the same platform, but the application, the focus, the sample types, right? It's a new problem that, and we, have been successful in doing that. So I think that's maybe one way where it's not like successive, right? I didn't pitch the same idea, for say cancer, and then you pitch the same thing, right? It's really having to bring the innovation in. And so the innovation I always find comes in lots of flavors. Sometimes it's technological innovation, sometimes it can be team, right? So integrating with physicians, right, that are getting different sample sets, is a lot of ways to bring additional innovation to programs, right, to kind of help you. But so Epicipher's used a lot of NIH funding. The way that we do this generally is that we have 4 pillars that we're building off of. And so we usually try to submit grants within our pillars of competence, right? And I won't go into the specifics of that, but that's kind of the way that happens. I try not to submit willy-nilly, because we did early, because I think when it's early, funds are important, and sometimes you're just like, well, let's just see where you don't really know where the company's going. But I think as we've really developed into it, we know where our pillars of competence are. We understand, I think, the market need really well into these spaces, and we try to innovate within those. And I think it's like, there's biophysical, biochemistry for us. It's antibodies and detection reagents for genomics, and then diagnostics and biomarker discovery. So you could imagine within those 4 platforms, within those 4 pillars, we're creating individual platforms that are addressing which we've identified as big need within that space. So you can kind of think about your own business and think about, do you have an opportunity to have multiple plays? I think Epicipher does. We're a very, like I said, research driven. I think if you're more of a one product, one focus, I think that is better probably to establish funding and then bounce to VC, and keep your focus, right? Because I think the grants can be very distracting. So if you're doing stuff that's outside of your interests, right? So to kind of go to what in comparison to NSF, from what I know from NIH, the grants are a little bit bigger. Sometimes, so it depends on agencies. There's a lot of different agencies at NIH, and each agency funds at different levels. They publish this. It's not very easy to find. But if anybody wants to reach out to me, I actually have it all collated in an Excel file, and I'm happy to share it. And I share it with people whenever. But there's basically what the advanced budget waiver topics are and which agencies. But say you can range between anywhere between 300,000 and 500,000 for a phase 1, and anywhere between $1 million to 1.5 million a year for either 2 or 3 years. So the grants can go from 2 to almost 4 million in the phase 2 bucket, but it's all agency driven. And I think the way that I always suggest, if you want to know whether or not you're good for NIH, I'm going to put this in the chat, is I send everybody to this. This is study sections, SBIR NIH study sections. And I would recommend anybody who wants to look at that to read through those. Just because you submit to a study section, that doesn't mean that there's an agency, right? So you can submit to a study section on, say, digestive sciences and still be at NHGRI, which is genomics, or you could go to NIDDK, which would be like kidney. And so there's complexity there, right, on how to figure out the right fit. But I think the best thing is read through those, and that NIH is really open, I think, in telling you what they're interested in. And then if you look at the budget waiver documents, they actually tell you what they think the really high impact stuff that they're really, really interested in, right? And so that's the way we kind of think about our projects. Is I look within the study sections, I think about where our core competencies are, I look at what they're looking for, and then I look at the budget waiver stuff, and that's what they're saying is like, you know, kind of they've got their eyes on these as high priority for each, and each institute has its own sets of priorities. And so you can get lost in that a little bit, but I do think it's worth spending time and really thinking about that. Because I think you want to really ask the question is, you know, non-dilutive funding from the government is great, but it can also be really distracting. And so I think it's really asking those fundamental questions and make sure you're really aligned. It's Epicipher we've worked out for us. But I think if it wasn't, it wouldn't be the right mechanism. So yeah, something to think about.
No, thank you. This is really great. And I think, you know, that you touched a little bit and we'll get to the point where we're talking about the program that you've developed and how do you really find that balance. But I think, you know, you said something that is the key to this point. It's hard to find. Right. So I think not everybody is as savvy in finding these opportunities. In my past life, I was also working with SBIR funded companies across the different agencies, from USDA to NIH to NSF to so on and so forth, on their commercialization part. And it's not always easy to navigate. So I guess to that point, even though you are, you know, in representing NSF or BARDA, and you are looking from the founder perspective, what would be your advice to companies here on how to best find opportunities to begin with? Because it's not always super straightforward. And here, you know, Martis, you've really helped with putting this study sections link here. And like you said, you've done a lot of work and you share that with founders. We'd love to share this with our founders as well. What are kind of other tips you have for people on how to find opportunities with other agencies, and where should they be looking for? And specifically, maybe when we're talking here, when we're answering this for biotools or life science tools and medtech companies.
Is that to me? Or to
I guess whoever wants to take it. So yeah.
Well, one of the nice things about the SBIR program is there is an SBIR roadshow. And that roadshow has representatives from every government agency with the SBIR program, and they talk a lot about the specifics of what they're looking for, their potential areas of focus, new initiatives that they may have during that process. You know, every agency is a little bit different, and how you approach that agency is going to be a little bit different. You know, with NSF, there's a project pitch process, which is different than pitching to an investor. I really think we should rename the project pitch, but it's really talking about your project and how it may fit in the program. That's the first point of contact with the program generally, and then we'll assess that and like, yeah, this is a good fit. Why don't you invite? And then we can talk about how the application process is. When I've spoken with at times with representatives from NIH, they present and they say, contact the program director. That we want to talk to you, reach out. Tell us about what you're doing. We'll see if this is a good fit for what the institute's looking for, what the program is looking for. You know, other places, it's good to find a kind of a champion within those programs that will help work with you to maybe even write an RFA about your project to help initiate that and have that funded as well. When I was working for small businesses, it was a challenge for sure, because everyone's a little bit different, and approaching, I went to DoD meetings and tried to engage with people and never had any success with DoD. But then I had other people that were in the same field, had a lot of success, and maybe they didn't like me. I'm not sure. Maybe our technology just wasn't a great fit. But it's a different beast, and some things are more relationship based. Other things are, it's difficult. But I really, if you have an opportunity to go to one of the road shows, or one of those programs where you have multiple agencies there together presenting, you can learn some of the similarities, learn some of the differences, and where the opportunities may be to fit.
Thank you. This is great advice. Anything else to add before we move on?
Yeah, I was actually just pulling up another link. So BARD actually runs this super awesome program called Tech Watch. So this is our kind of doorway into BARDA for companies to come present what they're looking at, any opportunity they're looking for. But the unique thing here is it's actually also open to other federal agency partners. So you have people from JPEO, DITRA, DoD, NIH, others. So it's an opportunity for not to get funding, but for companies to come showcase their technology and innovation to the federal government, and then ideally spur partnerships from that collaboration. So that's like, I guess, the mass way to do it in some ways, right? You may not know the program director, program office directly that aligns to your funding opportunity. And sometimes it is hard to navigate because, you may think your technology is in this center, but then it's all the way over there in some other use case or area. So we've found a lot of great success kind of bringing companies into this mechanism as a way to do market research, as well as identify and get them access to all these other partners.
I do want to touch on one more thing before we kind of switch gears into other parts of this, but we are talking a lot about SBIR grants here, which are for companies based in the US. We have companies, MedTech Innovator, BioTools Innovator is a global program, so we do have companies outside of the US. Companies here, please use our webinar library on our website. Last year we had a couple of panelists on the non-dilutive funding panel that have also talked about EU grants that are available for companies in these fields. But I also wanted to let Manbir talk a little bit about BARDA, because in this aspect it's a little bit different and does fund globally. So Manbir, if you want to just touch on this briefly.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think that's one of the unique things about BARDA, and in hindsight, makes sense, right? Pandemics, public health emergencies are not constrained to any borders, so neither is innovation. So we're able to actually support companies across the globe wherever they're developing their technologies. And again, I wish I had brought up the numbers, but I would say we have a pretty robust portfolio of companies that are supporting, whether it's through our non-dilutive or even dilutive funding options, which I think is a whole nother topic that I won't go into how we make those investments. But we have companies across Europe, Israel, Australia, and other places, and actively supporting them along the way.
Really important for everyone here to know. So thank you for this. I want to switch gears a little bit, talk about the actual process of writing grants, applying to grants, or BARDA applications, responding to the RFPs. So Martis, maybe let's start with you. What is your take on, this is the number one question from our cohorts all the time. So what's your take on grant writing and the other, from the other side, grant management? Do you do it in-house? Do you bring someone external? What are kind of your recommendations there?
Yeah, initially I should say the first couple of grants we did right. I think we got some consulting support. And I think that was kind of like getting your head around. As we were founded, we reached out to, there's a couple of SBIR firms, and we got some general guidance. They wanted to write grants for us. And I think we feel like you're just going to do a better job, I think, technically, having internal resources do that. So at Epicipher, when I said that I wrote grants. So I worked with the science team. And the PIs, and we came up with projects, and we wrote them up. But like, we had a central resource that did that. As for accounting, I can't imagine outsourcing accounting, as important as it is. Not having somebody like, so we have accounting resources internal that are helping us with coding and stuff, because it's a challenge to get it started. Once you have the processes in place, it's not bad, but you have to grow up pretty fast from an accounting perspective. I think one thing I can tell you from as a tool, NIAID, NIAID, publishes some representative grants online. And I'm trying to I don't know if they have phase 1s and phase 2s, but I know they have, and I looked at it because we were submitting a fast track, which is a unique NIH mechanism where it's basically phase 1 and phase 2 combined. And I was wondering, well, geez, what does that look like? And they had an example, right? And so I think that what a great resource, right, for you to be able to look at and be like, because there are specific things. There's these go, no go, right? If you have to pass quantitative metrics, how do you write that up? And I'm sure BARDA, very similar, like there's a way to approach kind of, those sections, and NIAID just gave us, they published that. And I thought that was so helpful. So I haven't looked recently, but it might be worth, NIAID is particularly good at, and stuff that works for NIAID is going to work for any, it'll work for NIA, aging, or any of the other institutes. There's nothing particular about that, but they seem to be pretty proactive on that front to kind of get started.
And then let me ask Eric and Manpir here. Is there any data? First of all, do you even know if companies are writing their own grants? Do they need to point that out anywhere, or if they're hiring someone external to write the grants? And is there any data on success rates for companies that are using external writers or grant writers, or internally doing so?
I'll take a stab at that. We don't have any place on our proposal to state whether a grant writer is used or not, so we can't really grab any specific data from that. However, you can often tell. A lot of times there's similarities of style, or other types of things, formatting that it's like, oh, you see that with a few different proposals, that they're using a grant writer to do that. I generally suggest, I don't want to take business away from grant writers, because that's their job, their occupation, and that's how they make their living. But I don't see much of an advantage for the vast majority of companies to use a grant writer, and there's a number of reasons for that. Just like Marta said, the people who are engaged in the project are going to be able to articulate what their technology is much better than a grant writer can. However, some people need a little bit of assistance in laying things out clearly and organizing their thoughts. When I run reviews, I tell my panelists, this isn't a proposal beauty contest. It's not about grantsmanship, how nice something looks or something along those lines. It's how well you can articulate what the technology is and what the pathway that they have to develop that technically, and then get it out to the market and have that broader impact getting to people. So that's one thing. And I think the principals of the companies are going to do a much better job of articulating that. But sometimes you need someone external to kind of help you out with the organization to make sure you're talking clearly. Because when you're immersed in something, sometimes you're not viewing it objectively from an outside lens, and having someone from the outside look at that and making sure that you're clearly articulating what you want can be important. An issue also with grant writers sometimes is, are they going to put things into the proposal that the company is actually going to be able to accomplish and do? And what we have seen at times is, if you have an external person come in and prepare a grant, it looks great, it reviews well, you get an award, and the company doesn't have the capability to actually perform the work which was inside of it. That's an issue, because we want the technologies and companies to develop and evolve and get products out to market. It's not just about getting money in the door, it's having an output, at the end of the day. And then, lastly, you have to pay the grant writers, usually out of the fee from a potential award. For NSF companies, probably more than a lot of others, that fee is extremely important. And I know it's important for other companies as well. But it is, up to 7% of your total direct and indirect costs that you can use for anything. and it's profit to the company. And if you're giving that away to a grant writer, you don't have that source of funds anymore that you can use on early IP, other business expenses, paying for, I need to buy something from overseas when I couldn't do it using my direct costs. I'm going to use my fee to do it, other types of, things like that allow greater flexibility. So there are pros and cons. From my perspective, there are more cons than pros. But at the same time, it can be very helpful for certain companies to engage.
And I guess, we'll just say that, of course, it depends on the background of the team, right? The ability to, if you have that background, the ability to write grants, if you're deeply in touch with the scientific side of things yourself, or someone in your team that can really own this. So really dependent on this, but just kind of under the assumption that we're all kind of talking about a diverse team here with different backgrounds. Any other tools, and again, I'm going to open it up to the three of you. Any other tools that you would recommend here for maybe grant management or kind of organizing your grants? Again, I've worked with a lot of companies writing grants, and when they were writing grants, I saw this from the other side when they've already applied, but there were a lot of companies that talked to us about the need for these tools and what they've been using, what worked for them, what didn't work for them. Are there any tools that you would recommend or think that makes sense for companies, even just companies kind of starting out in this, in writing grants, or tools that you've used specifically, Marty? So I'm just going to open it up for everyone here.
Yeah. I mean, we don't use any tools. I'm going to just echo, I think what Eric was saying is that I think I'm going to be on the same thing too, that grant writers are great for a consulting purpose. I think for a long-term strategy for a company, I just, unless, but because I think the best use of a grant writer is the consulting of, hey, what you've written something similar to this. What does this look like? But I expect your principal should be heavily involved. And if you're doing a hands-off, I mean, that is not a recipe for success, right? There is no, hey, I'm going to write 4 grants for you. You guys are going to do minimal work. It's a disaster. Yeah, you might get a couple funded, but I think it's a waste of the government's time. I just don't think it's good business, but it does work, right? Because I think things do, as Eric said, like things get through, right? Because it's humans reviewing these things, right? And so the other part I wanted to say is fees. If you're going to use a grant writer, my suggestion is pay for the grant writer. Don't do fees, because it's cheap up front, but it kills you in the end. So I'm not going to throw a number out because of what I think grant writers should be for a phase 1 or phase 2, right? As I have friends that do this, and I won't do that to them. But you can imagine if you take a 7% fee on a $2 million award, that's $140,000. And if they wrote the thing for free, knowing that they can get 25 to 30% of their grants fund, it's a sweet business they got. But that doesn't serve the small business. It serves the consultant. So, and I think on the other side, what we did is when it came time for books, there are awesome grant writing and grant accounting. You just Google it. There's going to be several. I could, offline, I'll share, if anybody wants to follow up of who we used, I'll share that. But they were awesome, right? Because it's super daunting trying to figure out how to do coding, especially when your accountant doesn't know it. Once they learn it, just do it yourself, right? And then as for managing the projects, we just do this typical project management, right? It's all about regular standing meetings with stakeholders and making sure that the projects are moving or not moving. And do we need, are we going to deliver? And we have times like I communicate directly with our POs, our program officers at NIH. And I want to know that we're not going to be able to hit our deliverable 6 months before we don't hit it, right? And we start having those, versus you spent all the money and then, oh man, we didn't even get to this thing. We know that we're hitting, that we overcommitted, right? Because I mean, as Eric said, I don't think you intentionally over position yourself all the time. I think science just happens and you're like, wow, this isn't just not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen the way we said. So we want to change aim 2 or something like that. And NIH is super flexible at talking to you about it. And, and so it's not this big scary thing like, oh, just, we'll worry about it at the end. I think there's this ongoing discussion and so we don't use any tools or apps or things like that. It's just kind of old school project management. But it's with stakeholders that can impact the project and can also communicate effectively with the funding agencies to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening with the project.
And just to give everyone here on the call perspective, the reason we've asked Epicipher to be part of this webinar is there's just huge success with using the grants correctly and also winning and being awarded all these grants. And so that's why we really like your advice here. So thank you. Thank you for that. A little bit about maybe kind of jumping on to the next part is a little bit about writing the proposals. There are differences in how you write the proposal between agencies. Maybe you could kind of briefly touch on, our companies wanted to know, how do you best structure the proposal? What's your recommendation on this? Are there resources that can help us and give us guidance into how to write a proposal that works for you as a funder, right? So Eric, maybe you can start with, even the technical details, right? It's X pages. I recommend you do this much on the technical side, this much on the commercialization side, et cetera, or where can people find these details?
Yeah, it's a great question. And unlike NIAID, we don't have sample proposals. Every proposal that's been submitted is proprietary. We don't release them, and like I said, it would take a lot of effort to put together a fake proposal with all those different sections. However, the solicitation is a great place to find that information. I'll drop the NSF solicitation in the chat here, and in that you actually have a section where it talks about how you put together the proposal. And here you want to it's guidance. It's not mandatory, but it's like this section here to discuss the technical innovation, 3 to 4 pages. Talk about the team, 1 page. Talk about the commercial opportunities, 2 to 3 pages. Talk about the broader impact. So it lists all the different sections that you want to try to make sure you hit upon, that reviewers are going to be looking for, in when they evaluate the proposal. But I always tell companies, it's your proposal though. You can, if the layout makes more sense to do it a little bit differently, then go ahead and do that. We're not so prescriptive that it's gonna we're gonna make it so you have to follow this directly. And the reason I say that is because there are the 3 review criteria that NSF look for. As I mentioned, the intellectual merit, broader impacts, and commercial potential. Sometimes the narrative around one of those is a lot more impactful, and that could be what grabs the reader. And it's like, this is a big societal problem, and we want to address it. That's what we want to do. Or we've got this awesome technology, that's really innovative that no one else is doing, and so you might want to start with that. Or the commercial opportunity for this is huge. Look at all these things that are out there. So how you discuss the project in your proposal is up to you. If you want to make, because it is your proposal, you want to make it your own, but there is some guidance in the solicitation that talks about the different sections you want to make sure you hit upon in recommended time space that you want to devote to that.
Manbir, you want to address this as well?
Yeah, of course. So kind of piggybacking off of all of Eric's points. So we like to think that we give everybody the right information and guidelines for how to submit. So the way that BARDA's EZBA solicitations in particular work is they're almost like a venture note. Here's a technology area that we want to invest in or fund technologies in. Here's what's in scope and here's what's out of scope. So that's normally your first trigger. See if it works. If you find that your technology is in scope and it aligns with what we're looking for, then as I mentioned, we ask for an abstract as like the first submission. But a lot of times, I think what's not necessarily done and should be is, there is a reason why every program, whether it's within BARDA or other agencies, they have an email address, right? So I think one of the unique things about federal funding is you can reach out to the program manager, program director, at least within BARDA directly, and schedule what's called a pre-submission market research call, where you can, if they're interested in your technology, you can share the feedback, similar to the Tech Watch program that we have, and receive feedback on your technology before you submit anything. It's not meant to be, we're going to fund you or anything. It's just to learn more about your technology and make that connection. Because once you officially submit something to us, we can't give you feedback. We have to look at your proposal as is and make sure it's competitive as we receive it. So that's step one is, find that solicitation that's active, schedule a market research call, a pre-submission market research call, or a Tech Watch meeting. The next one is the abstract. We actually have a full detailed outline, including bullets and examples of what we're looking for. We set a limit for, I think, 12,500 characters or something like that. So 2,000 words. So super short and tells you exactly where you're looking, what we need from there. And then, yeah, that's really the main preface of it. So, you may want, so I think it's really about sticking in the lines for such solicitation, what we're looking for, and then applying your technology to that. And we know that all technologies will not obviously fit directly into the funding solicitation. So that's where we're looking for the narrative, right? You're developing a technology that maybe for a different indication, different use case, that could be aligned to our mission space and the areas that we want to solve, for example, sepsis or other indications. So that's your narrative, right? How are you going to solve this problem with your technology? And here's why I need this funding and this data. And then from there, you can build that project milestone-based plan to really help, support your narrative and get that feedback and funding in the future and build that connection. At least build that connection, right? First, that's the first thing. We always love talking to people. Behind the closed doors, the funders are all people who are passionate about the technology area and the domain that they work in, and they want to fund projects and they want to be successful. And I think, that reaching out and networking is the first key component to that.
And I want to maybe follow up with on this with a question about the elephant in the room. So companies read the solicitations, and sometimes it may fit something that they're doing, not exactly. So that's where fitting a square peg into a round hole starts, right? So let's talk a little bit about that dance and balance, right? Maybe Martis, if you could lead this off, how do you kind of find a balance between answering the solicitation but not overreaching in a way that distracts you? And you said the word distract a couple of times here, right? In a way that distracts you from your business goal. So what's kind of your red line, right, that you wouldn't cross?
Yeah, well, I think that's one reason why DoD and BARDA hasn't been a good fit for us is and that's why actually I've been writing down maybe this Tech Watch and having more direct discussions, because when I read the solicitations, I'm like, it doesn't fit what we're doing, right? Or what we want to do. NIH is very broad, and as long as they're sitting within areas that they're interested in, I think if it's innovative and fits a market need and you can tell a convincing story, I think it's all pretty fair game. So I think what became the challenge for us is, where is your core business? And asking that question. And I think is like, yeah, this is a cool idea. We could get funding for it. We could probably execute on it, but it doesn't serve our core mission. And I think that's one thing that we've done a few times. And I just, at the end of the day, it wasn't worth it, right? Having the money and funding our scientists to do the work to just, and maybe we published on it. And there's actually one program in Progeneral, we made some reagents, and 4 years later, they found their way into a publication, but it wasn't the best for on strategy. So I think that's just asking the simple question is, does this help me grow the business and grow revenue? And so we have to be really careful with diagnostics, right? And I think that's a space where there's a lot of different epigenetic diagnostics, and that's the area that we've been kind of like, there's a way that we know to do it, and we kind of have to stay in our lane. right? And not try to get out of the lane because it's one, we're not quite staffed to do it appropriately, right? Like, it's just kind of having the expertise. And then two, it's not part of our central model.
And you have to be very disciplined to say that, right? It's kind of like, oh, but there's a funding opportunity and we really need the money. So,
Well, I think
so maybe we could do that, but it's you have to be very disciplined. And I appreciate you saying this just kind of upfront. We had to understand where it's not our core.
I think it goes back to like who's making these decisions. I mean, I still with the team, I still make all lead like what are we doing? And I say, they can drop a crazy plan, but I still am like, no, right? Like that, yes, it's probably could be fundable, but like it's not part of the mission. And so I think it's just back to like what Eric, it's like just controlling the whole system, right? Like if you're going to build and use non-dilutive funding, don't outsource key ideas. Keep all of the thoughts and what you're doing in the strategy aligned. And so, all of those strategic decisions about which grants we're going in, it's at the top level of our business is making these decisions. And I think that's served us well versus, just with the mission of getting money and not having, the key decision makers that are looking at the big strategic vision of the company weighing in on, which they absolutely should. And if they're not, I think that's a problem.
And Eric and Manveer, from your side as funders, do you kind of find yourselves or your reviewers find themselves kind of gatekeeping these kind of things? Or from your perspective, if a company suggests something, even though it looks like it's far from their core business, I'm interested in this. I want to fund something like this. So if the company wants to do it, I'm going to give them a chance to do it. Or do you find yourself playing that role of guarding that?
Well, we can't really be too prescriptive as to what we tell companies to do with their business model, and so when I and reviewers evaluate proposals, they will look at the qualifications of the team, make sure that they have the capabilities to perform the actual work. In phase one, you don't necessarily need to have your whole business team built out, but you want to have an idea of what your commercialization pathway will be and what the opportunity is there. And if your expertise and experience doesn't fit what your commercialization and technology development pathway looks like, there's going to be an issue in the review process. That said, it's not uncommon for companies to pivot. Whether they realize that there's an opportunity that may be different than what they originally were trying to do, and they see this as something where their company could grow and they want to move into, and they want to use a new SBIR or award of some sort to see if that they're able to get that technology off the ground and open up that opportunity. And I'm fine with that. As long as they, but what I don't like to see is companies trying to hide that. Be very upfront. It's like, this is what we've been doing. However, we see this opportunity and we're going to move to this. And this is how we want to do it. And then kind of lay that out. Be very upfront and open about that. And because what happens sometimes is like, oh, these guys have been developing this other thing for the last 10 years, and now they have this. They're saying this is other kind of company, and then you start pulling strings, pulling the threads, and everything starts to fall apart. And it's like, okay, what are they trying to hide here? The reviewers will do that as well, and there's like something just doesn't feel right about this company. Something doesn't feel right about the proposal and how things are laid out.
No, that's great. Thank you. I'd want to, unless, sorry, Manveer, did you want to
No,
answer?
I just wanted to add to that. I think especially with the BARDA, we're in a unique position, developing out these health security countermeasures that, for the most part, don't have a commercial space other than the government buying it, right? So imagine, I mean, I don't think it'll apply here, but imagine like a vaccine or drug for Ebola, for example, right? Thank God Ebola is not common in the hospital setting, but so in essence, government or a federal agency is your partner for that. So I think something that I personally do work with a lot is ensuring that companies have a commercially viable pathway as they're first to market, and then they can support our mission space and that's where we're looking at a lot of platform technologies and other types of innovations to really help support that. So with that, to Martis's point, it is important, to have that business decision, right? If you want to take funding from the federal agencies to, sometimes pivot your current research to see if it's valid. You can do validation here for our use case, something that we're interested in. Obviously, if there's success, it goes a long way. But if not, that's a business decision that you have to kind of see where you want to go and go path towards. And I think I saw a lot of comments in the chat as well as questions. So about, opportunities for medical devices, diagnostics and areas. And that's kind of my personal passion project with my program. So I'll drop another link with the BARD Accelerator Network, where we have the commercialization business support to really help companies on that spectrum, but also in the earlier stage, but funding opportunities via our solicitations that are effectively more open and broad sourcing. So looking for anything in the diagnostics device space, therapeutic vaccines. Currently, we'll have other hubs launching over the next year or over this fall, supporting digital health tools, for example, one on enabling technologies and one on special populations that are looking at solving those issues and building innovations for pediatrics, low resource settings, immunocompromised settings, for example. So that is definitely on top of our mind, right? And we want to bring in companies and make sure it's working for their business commercialization strategy, and not just on the technical side, because at the end of the day, if the government can't fund you all the time, because thank God we're not in an emergency state at all times, we want to ensure that you're there, you're able to support your business and be successful, but then you're there to be activated when we need you for that preparedness and response scenario.
Thank you. I think somehow, when time flies when you're having fun, somehow we are almost at times, and we will continue. So just kind of a quick word for our panelists and for our for people watching us through the live stream on LinkedIn. So we will end the live stream in about a minute or two, and then we will continue to take questions from our cohort directly in the next 30 minutes. So panelists, please don't go anywhere. But before we end, maybe kind of a last word of advice from each of you to companies. If there's one thing that they need to take away from this webinar when they think about using non-dilutive funding in its different forms, what would you want it to be? Maybe Manbir, we'll start with you this time.
For us, the use of funding is for that technical development of your technology, but I think my takeaway always is, please come talk to us before you submit anything. And we are happy to talk. And if I'm not the right person, I may know who is, and I'm happy to connect you to them and make sure that partnership relationship forms, right? Because in the future, we may have funding opportunities that do align, and we'll be like, oh yeah, I did meet with this company and they're in my dashboard. I can go back to them and see and reach out to them like, hey, I think that's a great opportunity for you to apply to. And you would never know that, right? Unless you're always scouring our website, which I respect you if you are.
All right, thank you. And Eric.
I guess one of the biggest things that I would say, especially when you're talking about NSF, is don't hide your risk. A lot of times when you're talking to investors, you want to downplay the risk of your development. When you're coming to NSF, SBIR, and also to some extent NIH and other programs, you want to leverage that program to help you de-risk your technology. You want to be upfront and say, this could be great, but this is this big barrier that we have to overcome. And the focus of our phase 1 and then phase 2 is to address that technical risk. And if we're able to do that, that's going to move us down the pathway more likely to get follow-on funding from other sources as well. So don't hide the risk. Talk about what it is. Talk about how you plan to address it, and if you're able to address it, how that benefit can get out there.
And Martis.
All right. Well, I think use the grants as an opportunity to develop and vet your ideas, right? So I think grants are a pitch, right? It's a scientific pitch. And if you can't get really excited about it or form your ideas to be excited, to get other people excited about it, you got to really think about what you're doing, right? And so I think it's been awesome because we sit and think about all the time, where is the market fit? Where's the market need? You know, are we doing the right thing? What's the latest in technologies? And so that has, again, it's because we're using grants, we're current, and I think we use it to our advantage to be on the leading edge and to stay on it and not just kind of fall into, hey, this is what our company does, but like, what can we do with this technology? What is the new thing? What's, you know, so I think about that really hard, right? And even on your commercialization plan, right? I think that's a part that people usually panic about. And I think that's one thing that you should really understand, right? Is how do you take it? And one way that we do that is that Rome's not built in a day, right? If you need to design a project and a scope, and you know, you can say that like, you know, the big vision is this, but to what Eric was saying, but to de-risk this thing, we got to do this, right? And this is the scope of this project, and we think it's realistic and it will have an impact. And we usually try to do that with an MVP in sight, so that we'd say is like, we're going to package this up and start getting it in people's hands and in labs. And that's been successful. And then the next thing is, what's the next step? What's the next thing, right? And sometimes that's funded through Epicipher. Sometimes that's funded through partner, you know, collaborations and stuff like that. And sometimes it's funded by another grant, right? If it's a big enough high risk thing that it's not just turning the crank, you know, we will develop more projects and continue the work. And I'll end on which I tell everybody is don't drink the Kool-Aid, right? Like you get really excited about your projects when you talk about yourself, about your projects all the time. And so I really recommend sharing your ideas outside, share your proposals with NIH or with the agencies, with your friends, you know, with other companies, and let them just tear it apart.
Yeah.
And then build back, right? I think, yeah, one thing that I've seen is that, yeah, you get focused on your own idea, you think it's great, and you just miss the point because you weren't thinking about other things. So yeah, external feedback and just vet. And I think it's worked for us for being successful.
And I think it's a great way to look at it, right? Using grants as kind of your own engine for innovation and the ability to do these things, and just a way to see what's out there, how are people responding to what you're doing. I think that is a fantastic advice to end the public part of the webinar on. So again, I want to thank our panelists. Please don't go anywhere. And then thank our viewers on YouTube and LinkedIn. And Gabby, I think we can turn